Welcome to the Project Exodus podcast series on OFM podcasts. Join us weekly as we explore critical topics on addiction and recovery through insightful discussions, heartfelt interviews, and practical Q&A sessions with members of the Project Exodus team and community. Project Exodus is dedicated to making expert recovery interventions accessible to all communities. Through this podcast series, our hope is that understanding and support for those on the path to recovery will be enhanced. Whether you're personally recovering, supporting someone else, or just curious, join us in building a community of awareness, compassion, and hope.
So welcome to another episode of our Project Exodus podcast series. Today we have got Gareth from the Project Exodus team and Melissa from Grace Riverside Recovery. And they are going to be joining us today to chat about some community questions we've received regarding supporters recovery. And so both of you have got a lot of experience in that area. And so, yeah, we're just going to be reading through some of those community questions and then you guys can just give your answers. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thanks.
Sure. So the first question we have here is, how can loved ones better understand what someone in recovery is going through? So Gareth, I don't know if you want to give a go at that one.
I think the best way is to educate on addiction itself. I think from a personal experience, I didn't understand. I didn't know what addiction was, and I couldn't help in any way without that knowledge.
Sure. What do you think?
I agree with Gareth. If you don't know better, you don't do better. So getting into a group and learning about addiction and what it does and the environment and the things like that makes a very big difference. And it changes how I have worked through the space.
Yeah,
Right.
good.
Okay, cool. Are there any other ways that someone can educate themselves with the recovery process?
I think the best way, look, there will be other ways in terms of, personal development and picking up a education on and reading a book on addiction, etc. But I think the best way would be to join a recovery group. Number one, it's not a one-on-one situation, so it's a group environment. So you hear stories of other people's challenges, other people's lives, and how it connects with yours, and can learn from that, and just learn self-awareness vicariously through the group.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you, guys. So another question we have is, what resources, so it's actually quite similar to what we're saying, what resources are available for family members and friends who need support themselves?
Mel, do you want to grab that one?
I think the first thing is the groups, but also plugging into some form of a community. So there's not just the in-person groups, there's the online thing. So if you cannot make it to an in-person, face-to-face group, you still have online accessibility to a group that Project Exodus also runs for supporters. That's is specific to a supporter recovery. And you find a tribe and a community that helps you through that process.
Yeah.
Can I add there? I think it's important also to realize the difference between, or the benefit of going to a recovery-specific group, support group, instead of perhaps going with one's challenges to a counselling group or support care or whatever, because the addiction recovery really does have its own unique challenges. And the understanding of addiction itself is often not there in normal counselling scenarios.
And what would you say to someone who they've got a family member that's in addiction and they want to reach out and get, but they kind of have some barriers to it? Like, do I really have to go to a group to really? What would you say to someone like that?
Gareth?
I would say just go. I hung back from entering into a recovery group. My wife was in addiction recovery, and she often asked me to attend, and I really didn't think I had any problem, so why must I attend a group? But therein lies the issue, and that is that even though I didn't have any sort of real problem per se, it lessened my ability to understand the addiction side.
Right.
So if I was going to have any sort of meaningful relationship or knowledge of where my wife was at, I really did need to get involved, and even just for my understanding of how recovery, well, how addiction operates, and to comprehend that, and obviously the recovery process itself.
Right. Makes sense. Do you want to add anything, Melissa?
I think when I think back to going into my first group, Gareth was actually leading that group. And he said, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So if I had to let fear keep me out of getting into the recovery space and going to a group and getting plugged in, nothing would have changed.
Sure.
I would have been stuck in that cycle of letting the addiction continue by not empowering myself to change things.
Sure. That's good.
So
Sure. Thank you.
I think it can be quite an intimidating space to enter into,
Yeah.
even from my own experience. And I think it could be beneficial if you go with a friend or perhaps another family member as well,
Right.
just for some
Support.
some support
Yeah.
structure
Within support.
within
Not
the
going in
support.
there alone,
Yeah.
yeah. That's cool.
Mm.
Shot. All right. The next question we have here is, how can loved ones strike a balance between support and enabling?
Oh gosh.
You've got to learn the skills. And it is a tough one. I mean, we working in the groups, you see, there's that, it's a fine line
Yeah.
between like, where's the boundary?
Yeah.
Where is that boundary of me enabling and like giving in to me giving that firm line? Like, no, this has to
Yeah,
stop
yeah.
now. It's a tricky one. And for each person, it is different. Each environment is different. And it's a lot has to do with the supporter themselves and how far you're willing to go for your recovery and the recovery of your loved one. I would think.
Yeah. And for you guys personally, have you had to deal with that difficulty of trying to be over supportive almost and enabling? Has that been?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I fed into my wife's addiction by enabling and doing things that she could quite well do for herself. Yet I took perhaps a bit of value was in me doing those things to get a sense of value from her,
Yeah.
almost a validation.
Yeah.
And that was just full on enabling. And I only learned that through recovery, which was quite interesting. Yeah.
And for you, Melissa, anything that you had to deal with in that sense?
I think the whole first 6 months of my marriage was an enabling. And then I got into recovery and it was like, no. And then no became a full sentence thereafter.
That's good.
But it has been, it's a journey. I mean, even till this day, I've been in recovery almost 4 years. And there's still areas where I've got to catch myself not to enable and be like, I need to think, is this my load to carry? Is this mine to handle? Or can Nick do it for himself?
Yeah.
I think part of the trick is also, you mentioned the word balance, Gerhardus, and I think part of it is also it's to find the balance between not enabling, and I'm talking specifically in sort of a marriage or partnership kind of relationship at this point, but find the balance between not enabling, but then also being able to support as a loved one.
Right.
And I think the same would go for a child in addiction. That there's a line, there's definitely that balance, but only going through it and becoming aware can you make it happen.
Sure. Do you guys have a quick example of like where you had to say no, like where you were like, actually, this is no, like a specific scenario?
I think a big thing for us has been with finances. Actually having communicating about where finances are going, and when I've been asked like, oh, can we do this, or it's like no, being able to draw that line in the sand. There's some things that we can do, some things that we can't, and like footing the bill for things that are not family orientated. I guess.
I think just saying no to in a nice way. Let's take two examples. One for my child who was in addiction, or son rather, and then my wife. So with my son, it might be the simple one would be that, let's say the dishes are dirty, and me wanting to have the place clean, I would just do them. Meanwhile, he hasn't done dishes in a week. It's part of his chores. So I'd actually enable that,
Right.
which would allow him the time. Or so along those lines.
Right.
And I think similarly with my wife, strangely enough, so I would end up doing quite a bit around the home, giving her space to not do it,
Yes.
but go overboard in terms of what actually, there was no give or take. It felt like that I was just doing
I
everything.
get you. Yeah.
But that's where the value came in, I think.
Right. Right. Let's go to the next question. So, how can open communication help build trust and strengthen relationships during the recovery process?
I think a big thing in recovery is honesty and transparency, and that comes through from the beginning. If you're truly working a recovery program, honesty and transparency is one of the key pillars that you will hold on to, and that opens up communication. I mean, before getting into recovery, I am considered a hedgehog. So, when like conflict happens, it's like, like that. That's me. And, but since being in the recovery space, communication has improved.
Right.
Being able to be assertive and not like passive aggressive has been so good. And that allows for the freedom, for example, for Nick to share what's going on. For him to be real and know that he's not going to be attacked or judged or treated unfairly. He can be free to share, like, this is what I'm going through, this is what I'm struggling with, I need you, and what he needs from me. And for me, on the supporter side, I can also say, like, you've been behaving like this, it's triggering me, what's going on.
Yes.
And that open,
just laying it out. And
laying
being
it out
real,
there has been awesome.
So good. Very good.
Yeah, I think similarly for me, I think it's about opening up the communication and being able to have, if you want to call it, sort of critical conversations that might hurt or might feel uncomfortable in the beginning, but actually working through that stuff is very real and is helpful.
Sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Next one we have is, what does recovery look like for me? So this is obviously a question that someone has put out there. So maybe just for you guys, what does recovery look like for you, or how would you answer this question if someone asked you that?
I think straight away I would say boundaries, self-care, and those two.
Yeah.
I think particularly the boundaries would be the difficult one to work on. With my son, I know it would be a case of you not allowed to do drugs in the house. He would do drugs in the house. I wouldn't put a consequence down. So I laid a boundary. It was communicated, but I couldn't follow through on it. So that, number one, also led to more enabling. That's literally and the fact that there was no consequence fed into the addiction and into the cycle. Yeah. So even though I didn't cause the addiction, I was part of that dysfunction cycle within the home dynamic. And I think, so boundaries is critical. It's critical to follow through with boundaries and have realistic ones. And then self-care is important. I think in addiction, a lot is lost. I think that a lot of myself was lost. And to gain that back through doing things for me is very important.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's awesome. How about for you, Melissa? What does your recovery look like?
For me, recovery has become a lifestyle because it's not just like recovery in one portion of the pie. The skills and the attitudes and the behaviors is infiltrating every area of my life, which is huge. And I agree, boundaries has been a big one, because it's not just boundaries with the family members or the ones you're supporting in the recovery space. It's also boundaries in every aspect of my life.
Good.
Sure.
Being able to communicate them and stick to them. And I agree, the consequences is a tricky one. But once it's laid and you see the effects of the positives that it can bring out, it's amazing. And personal growth.
Sure.
I think dedicating time to grow personally, to learn more, one, about recovery, what addiction does, but also for myself, things that I put on the back burner because I didn't want to put myself on a pedestal and do things for myself. Now being able to grow and do things like challenge myself and say like, okay, I'm going to go run a 10K. Yay, set the date, go run it.
So cool.
It's been awesome. Yeah.
It's
But I think it's also very different when it's recovery with a loved one and with a husband or wife, and recovery with a child, and getting into that space. Because one of the things that we've picked up in groups is that it's easy for a spouse to say no. It's easy to set up a boundary with the spouse. But when it's your child, it's a totally different thing, because it's like, oh, that's a part of my heart, and I can't say no. Or no, what if he goes and does something? What if she does something and hurts herself? That's where the trickiness comes in.
Yeah, good point.
Cool. All right, our next question is, how do I stop enabling?
Just say no. Joking aside, before anything, I think it's to really look at what my response would be in a situation, and to kind of put that on trial in a sense, and evaluate, okay, if I do this, will that be actually enabling? Or to ask the question, what can the person do for himself that I might be doing?
Sure, that's good.
Because that would be the essence of empowering. So offer the tools for the person to do whatever they need to do, but not actually do it for them.
Yeah.
I think that for me is what plays in my mind when I think of that.
Yeah, that's good. Melissa?
Yeah, oof, that's a tough one. I agree with what Gareth says about it, giving the tools for empowerment, but understanding, like, can the person do it for themselves? But I also feel like sitting down and actually, after a while, you gather, like, this is what's been happening, figuring out the patterns of behavior, and then coming up and actually communicating, like, this is what you're doing, these are the consequences, or this is the impact that it's having, and what the consequences are going to be, and how to help, like how they can move forward from it. And also sometimes you just got to take the step back and say, I'm not doing it. If that room is going to be a mess, the room is going to be a mess.
Sure.
If the meal is not going to be made, the meal is not going to be made. Because eventually it's like raising that bottom. And when they start feeling the consequences of their actions, there's hope that there might be change.
Right. Sure. Yeah. That's good. All right. So there's another one. Why can't my loved one just stop using?
Well, that's the nature of addiction, isn't it? So it goes back to, if that's what I'm asking myself, I really need then to go to a recovery group and gain insight as to what addiction is. More importantly, the recovery journey. But it's that no other answer than that for me, really. Melissa, I'm not sure if you have another one.
No, I think the big thing is, if they're not stopping, I mean, there's one thing, what is it? Abstinence is not really, there's more to recovery than just abstinence.
Yeah, need the radical change that goes with it.
Yeah.
There needs to be a radical change. And there's more to recovery than just them stopping. There's behaviors, there's attitudes, there's thinking patterns that need to change. And in that sense, as a supporter, I need to heal. I need to figure out what am I doing to enable the behavior, to keep the cycle going, and then bring about that change.
Right. So it's not that simple. Hey?
It's not that. It's a journey. Recovery is actually a journey. It's not a quick fix.
Yeah, that's good. What to do with controlling an emotionally abusive husband? So, if someone's in a emotionally abusive relationship, what would you say is the best way to go about resolving that?
I would say seek wise counsel or speak to people. I would say attend recovery groups, addiction recovery groups. That can then lead to making yourself stronger and maybe putting in the boundaries. If the husband is abusive emotionally, I think there could be quite a lack of self-worth on the partner or in this case, you're saying husband, so from the wife's side. So there might be lack of self-esteem, lack of self-worth. So the actual strength and resilience to sort of stand up against that might not be there. And I think that's where recovery groups is really valuable, because in a recovery group, it allows you to be seen and heard for who you are. And in that, the emotional intelligence can gain traction. So that would be a key factor for me. The other one would be to see perhaps a professional, depending on how far the abuse is and what are we talking there. Yeah.
Agree with what Gareth said.
Okay, nice, cool. All right. And we've got one more here. So how can those supporting someone in recovery also take care of their own mental health? Yeah. So I suppose it's going back to what we spoke about previously, about, you mentioned self-care, boundaries, things like that. So how can someone prioritize essentially themselves in recovery?
I think, yes. So that's the word there. Prioritize myself in a recovery journey. So not doing my loved one or my child's recovery for them.
Yeah.
Not focusing on that, not being a policeman or policewoman in that environment, but actually striving for working towards a healthy relationship with myself first, putting myself first, and knowing that I can't control someone else's behavior. So they need to do what they need to do. I need to do what I need to do.
Yeah.
And hopefully down the line, a relationship is restored and we're working together.
Yeah. I think it goes back to when you're in a tribe, in a community of recovery for yourself, as a supporter, you have a community of people who can hold you accountable
Yeah, that's good.
for what's going on with you, who check in on you. I know with the supporter group, so on a Wednesday night, we have the online supporters group. And there will be people who will, if you mention something, they check in and hold you accountable. So if you said that you were going to go take a self-care day on a Wednesday or on a Thursday, they'll check in, someone will check in.
Yeah.
How was your self-care day?
Sure.
So it's like, you've been held accountable for that. But it's also little things like getting into habits of journaling or taking time out, going for counseling if you need it, speaking to a wise counsel. Because yes, for the addiction side of recovery, they have wise counsel. But in the supporter side as well, we do have that. We have accountability partners because we walk our own recovery journey as well. It might be slightly different, but it's still a recovery journey of our own.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank
So
you.
that's the end of the questions for today. Any sort of closing comments that you want to just say before we close today? Or?
You mentioned earlier that, this journey perhaps is not easy and there's challenges, but it's very fruitful. And I think what Melissa was saying earlier with that, it's actually a lifestyle. So we're looking at radical change. So it's effectively choosing a lifestyle that is healthy, both emotionally and physically and mentally, and walking that out. I don't think it should be looked upon as a difficult journey, or something that needs to be, done with a rod to my back kind of thing, but actually just something that you choose to do.
Right.
Addiction steals a lot from us. It destroys lives. But there is hope. There is hope in recovery, not just for the people that we're supporting in recovery, but for ourselves, that we can get through those seasons and be better people afterwards.
That's awesome. Sure. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time and just answering some questions and sharing from your own perspective and life story. Thank you, guys.
Cool. Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Sure. So if you guys enjoyed today's session, you can go onto our website actually to also give some questions for future episodes. It's www.projectexodus.net. If you want to find out anything else about what we do as Project Exodus, you can also go on that website. And please be sure to share this episode. If you know anyone who might benefit from some of what's been shared today, please send it through to them. And we'll catch you again next week.